What's up, YouTube? This is Elder Stacy Zanders coming to you with another video. But before I get into the video, I just want to say subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the like button for the video and that notification bell so you can be updated on all the new content that we release. Listen, you do not want to miss this two-part series of the most powerful man in the world. You do not want to miss this. I am going to be doing it more or less in a podcast format, which I'm going to be reading a 75-page interview talking about the most powerful man in the world, and it's not who you think it is. And they call this person the Black Pope, by Rick Martin. I'm going to read this interview to you that he conducted in the Jesuits. You think that there are world orders. You had even Kanye West made a video in that video called Power. He said, how can one man have all that power? But I want to read this interview to you, and you're going to find this both fascinating and jaw-dropping. You do not want to miss this series here. We're going to do, it's going to be a 2-hour series. I'm going to do it over a 2-hour span, this first hour, and then we're going to continue in another video for the second hour. The most powerful man in the world, the Black Pope, Hans Covenbach, the Jesuit general. And we're going to begin this here. You do not want to miss it. This is going to really enrich your life, and it's going to be jaw-dropping as some of the information that we're going to be revealing here, okay? And we're going to begin. So you thought that you were pretty well informed on by now about all of the main players on the conspiracy playing field. You've been hearing for years about or bumped into on your own the various elements of society who control the world from behind the scenes. You've gotten familiar with the role played by, for instance, the Khazarian Zionists who invented the word Jew to disguise their adopted heritage as distinguished by their biblical Judeans, or the role played by the bankers or banking gangsters controlling the economies of the world, by the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergs, the Committee of 300, the 17 wealthiest so-called elite families, the Rothschilds in England and Rockefellers in America, and Bronfmans in Canada, and on, comprising of the physical power structure of the New World Order puppets under the direction of a darkly motivated, other-dimensional master deceivers, commonly known as Lucifer or Satan and their fallen angel cohorts. While all of those details contribute to understanding the larger picture, what you are about to hear fills in the most important missing link in this entire structure. And I don't mean a little side issue. I mean the link so central, yet so well hidden from the general public view, and for so long that even the most studied of conspiracy theory scholars probably have not put together much of the information that is going to be presented to you in this series. To call from the following outlay controversial and sensitive is about as mild an understatement of the truth of the matter as can be made. The missing link changes the entire slant of the entire playing field. After months of anticipation and weeks of preparation, I was finally able to speak with Vatican assassins Arthur Eric John Phelps on Tuesday, March 14th. There was simply no other way to cover Eric's historic masterpiece spanning literally 5 centuries than to just ask questions covering huge spans of time and major historical events. It took us almost 4 hours to accomplish the task, yet we could easily have gone on for another 40. We here unwilling to reproduce the importance of this work by presenting it to you in such a distilled fashion. In fact, in order to share this material with at least some of the pertinent backup, Eric has granted us permission to print directly after the interview several excerpts from his soon-to-be published book, which will help you understand certain aspects of this magnificently important and broad-sweeping story. The missing link is surely a central link. Let's call this story the Jesuit-Vatican connection to the unfolding New World agenda. You make up your own mind just how absolutely central yet well hidden has been this link. There's a good reason the secret Vatican library is so extensive and yet remains so intact from outside intrusion, despite the many others who would like to possess such a collection of information, detailing much censored data about our true otherworldly cultural heritage. When one reads a word like Vatican assassins, one can't help but reflect back on the purposely adjusted and watered down and boring moments in high school history class. Meanwhile, the true history of what has gone on is dynamic and full of calculated intrigue. In this business, I've heard and read a lot of things, but when I had to pick my jaw up from off the floor during the reading of certain historical portions of Eric's book, well, let me just say that truth certainly is stranger and far interesting than many fictions have been led to believe are historical facts, and yet the truth does fit like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Now we're going to get into the interview. I just want you to sit patiently, pay attention, and listen, because this is going to be some very, very important information. It says, before we begin, let me just say a few words. The topic of your book is so comprehensive and covers literally all aspects of global control by the Jesuits dating back to 1540. I would like to begin our conversation with a very important point of clarification so that our readers have something to hold on to while reading the historical narrative we are about to present. Let me also add that your book is one of the most compelling, dynamic, genuinely educational, historical documents I have ever read. I want to tell you I am impressed. You literally link every major global conflict and political assassination to the hands of the Jesuit order. The Jews, as with many other groups you mentioned, have been the unwitting pawns in the Jesuits' agenda. Today, the present, I'm going to start here, and then we're going to go way back in time and work our way up. But I want to start here because it will give a foundation for going back in time. Today, who is the superior general of the Jesuits, the so-called Black Pope? The Black Pope here refers to hidden evil activities, not to race or color. Who gives the orders to the actual Pope? Is it still Jean-Baptiste Janssen? Jansen's Frenchman. No, he passed away in 1964. Then Pedro Europa came to power. Then after Europa died in 1988, I believe the present Jesuit general is Count Hans Kovenbach. I call him Count Hans Kovenhof. Let's discuss this position of general. And in addition, who is this person, Count Hans Kovenbach? Who does he serve? What are his origins? Where does he hail from? The present general is a Dutchman. His nationality is Dutch. Where is he physically? Where is he? He resides in Rome at the headquarters of the Jesuits, called the Church of Jesuit. So the Jesuit general resides in Rome at what I just called the Jesuit headquarters. The Church of Jesuit is that near the Vatican. It is not far from the Vatican, right? It is in the same general area. Its headquarters is the Knight of Malta. Its headquarters are the Knight of Malta. Is it part of the Vatican City proper? Right. I believe, yes it is. Where does Satan fit into this picture? And what is the ultimate goal of the Jesuits, the so-called Society of Jesus? The Jesuit general, and the other high Jesuit generals are sorcerers. They are Luciferians, and they worship what they would call Lucifer. They do not believe in Satan. They believe in Lucifer. Now, according to Alberto Rivera, he was invited because he was a top Jesuit at the time in the late 60s. He was invited to a black mass in Spain, where there were quite a few top Jesuit generals present, and he called it a black mass. Well, when you're invited to a black mass, you're involved in the worship of Lucifer, all dressed in their black capes and so on. I'm fascinated by Count Hans Kopenbach because nobody in the world knows who this person is. I've never heard his name. Let me just tell you that you can see his picture on top of Jesuits. Just a second, I'll get the book. The name of the book is called The Jesuits, a multi-biography by Jean Lecoeur, and that is available usually in the bookstores. It was published in 1995. Jean Lecoeur is a Frenchman. He was a communist. He is a communist. On the last page of the picture in it, that is the right adjacent to the page 343, you see Peter Hans Kopenbach. He's the Jesuit general, and he looked like just a very evil individual. There's a black man who's a high Jesuit. He's a 29 superior Jesuit with his cosmopolitan general staff. One of the general staff looks like Ben Kingsley of Schindler's List. There are 6 white men and 1 black man, and that's his general staff. What is the purpose of choosing a successor general? The high Jesuit elect him, and he's elected for life, unless he becomes a heretic. And the so-called high Jesuit represents what group? I would say that they professed the high 4th degree. When a Jesuit is professed, he is under the Jesuit oath. He is under the bloody oath that I have in my book. Do we have permission to reprint the oath in our papers? Of course, absolutely. One of my questions has to do with the oath and its similarity to the protocols of the leadered elders of Zion. And I wrote with questions before I got back to the protocols portion of the book. The Jesuits obviously wrote the protocols because they have carried out every protocol in that little handbook. They have carried everything out. And Alberto Rivera says, and he was a Jesuit, he was greatly mingled and not helped at all by the apostate Protestants, the Baptists, in this country. He was helped somewhat by Jack Chick. Jack Chick published a story in 6 volumes. Alberto Rivera says that it was Jews allying with the Pope who published the protocols. Well, I tend to feel that it was just the Jesuits themselves, because they and they alone are the ones who are able to bring this to pass. They're the ones in the government. They're the ones behind professional sports. The owners of the Pittsburgh Steelers is a Knight of Malta. The owner of the Detroit Lions is a Knight of Malta. All of your top owners of the ball clubs, for the most part, are Knights of Malta, getting the people whooped up into his hoopla over games and sports while they're busy creating tyranny. So that was one of the things in the protocols, that they would create amusements. Another one they used was Walt Disney, 33rd degree Freemason, Disney World, Disneyland. Another was Milton Hershey, with Hershey Park. They create all of the amusement and games and pastimes to get the people drunk with pleasure while they're busy overthrowing the Protestant form of government. Where does Las Vegas factor into all of this? Las Vegas, well, for the most part, is controlled by the mafia. But all of the high mafia families are Roman Catholic. They are all subordinate to the Pope or to the Cardinal of New York, which is Cardinal O'Connor, because the commission of the Mafia Commission resides in New York. Frank Costello was a member of the Mob Commission, and he was intimate personal friends with Knight of Malta, Hollywood mogul Joe Kennedy, and that has not changed. So the High Knights are good, dear brothers of the High Mafia Dons, the Gambinos, the Luccis, the Colombos, all of them. And they control Hollywood, not the Jews. It's only Jews who are front men who are involved in Hollywood and work for the mafia and the Cardinal. Just like in politics, it would be Arlene Specter. Arlene Specter was Spelly's, Cardinal Spellman's Jew in the assassination of President Kennedy. He would never say a word about it. Now, as we go through here, if there's anything that you don't want me to print, let me know, because literally I'm going to print everything we say in this conversation. That's fine. That's fine with me because it needs to be said. Let's go back to Count Hans Koffenbach. I want to shine the spotlight on this guy for just a little bit here. Let's talk about him. What does he do? Who is he? Let's talk about his position as general. Who do they exercise his control over? The Pope? Does the Pope know he's a pawn? Okay, one question at a time. So which question do you want me to deal with? Let's shine light right on the Count, the Jesuit general, okay? Let's start here. And you tell me everything you want to tell me about that position. The Jesuit general is an absolute, complete, and total dictator, an autocrat of the order. When he speaks, his providentials move. The providentials are his major subordinates. There are around 83 providentials right now. As I understand it, the Jesuit order has divided the world into 83 regions, okay? For each region, there is a Jesuit providential. There are 10 providentials in the United States. There are one for Central America. There is one for Ireland. They've divided up the world into these provinces. So it's old Babylonian providential government centered in Nebuchadnezzar, or the Jesuit general himself. So it's strictly a Roman form of government. There are all the states or provinces are subordinate to this worldwide sovereign. The Jesuit general exercises full and complete power over the order. He meets with his providentials when they decide to start a war or an agitation. He gets the information from the providential of that country, how best to go about this, the demeanor of the people, and then he uses legitimate grievances to foam an agitation like the 1964 Civil Rights Movement. That was all a Jesuit agitation completely, because the end result was more consolidation of power in Washington with the 1964 Civil Rights Act that was written by the longtime president of the University of Notre Dame, the revered Theodore Herzl. The Jesuit general rules the world through his providentials. And the providentials then, of course, rule the lower Jesuits. And there are many Jesuits who are not professed. So many of the lower Jesuits have no idea what's going on at the top. They have no concept of the power of the order. It's just like Freemasonry. The lower Freemasons have no idea that the high Shriner Freemasons are working for the Jesuit general. They think they are just doing works and being good people.
But the bottom line is that the high-level Freemasons are subject also to the Jesuit general, because the Jesuit general with Frederick the Great wrote the high degrees, the last 8 degrees of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry, when Frederick protected them when they were surpassed by the Pope in 1773. So you have the alignment of the Jesuit order and the most powerful Freemason they had in the craft, Frederick the Great, during their suppression. This is an irrefutable conclusion. And then when you see the Napoleonic Wars, the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars carried out by Freemasonry, everything Napoleon did and the Jacobins, whatever they did, completely benefited the Jesuit order. It's to this end that Alexander Dumas wrote in his The Count of Monte Cristo. The Count is the Jesuit general. Monte or Mount or Cristo equal Christ. The Count of Monte, the Mount of Christ, Alexander Dumas was talking about the Jesuit general getting vengeance when the Jesuits were suppressed, and many of them were consigned to an island 3 hours sailing west off the coast of Portugal. And so when the Jesuits finally regained their power, they punished all of the monarchs of Europe who had suppressed them, drove them from their thrones, including the Knights of Malta from Malta, using Napoleon. And Alexander Dumas, who fought for the Italian patriots in 1848 to free Rome from the temporal power of the Pope, wrote many books, and one of the books was to expose this, and that was The Count of Monte Cristo. So when you read that book, bear in mind that it's really a satire on the Jesuit order regaining their power in France. The Count of Monte Cristo has an intelligent apparatus that can't be beat. Well, that's the Jesuit order. But the Count doesn't get what he really ought to have, or his last wish and what he loved, and that's the love of women. He gains back all of his political power. He gains back everything he lost, but he doesn't have the love of a woman. And that is the Jesuit order. They have no women. They have no love of a woman, because to have a wife, to have a woman, means to have an alliance with your wife and family. And you cannot obey the general. That's why they will never be married. And that's one of the great keys of their success. They can betray a nation and walk away. They can betray all the Irish Catholics getting on the Titanic and walk away. They can betray us in Vietnam and walk away. They can betray us every time we go to the hospital and get radiated and cut and drudged and walk away, because it's for the greater glory of God. Ad mortuum Dei glorum, the greater glory of God who sits in Rome. What is the ultimate goal of the Jesuits? The ultimate goal is to rule the world with the Pope of their making. From Solomon's rebuilt temple in Jerusalem, that's their ultimate goal. And why is Solomon's temple rebuilt so important? Because the Jesuits always wanted that. When Ignatius Loyola first started the order, one of the first things he did was he wanted to go to Jerusalem to set up the Jesuit headquarters there. So he went there. He tried to do it, and it failed. Came back, went to school, started his Latin studies, etc. Maybe it might be a good idea to just review a little bit of Ignatius Loyola. Yes. Okay, Ignatius Loyola was a Spanish soldier, and he was wounded at a battle between the French and the Spanish, and his leg was shattered. Well, the French general, because Loyola was very brave in conflict, ordered his own doctors to attend Loyola. So they set the leg and sent him back to his home, which of course he was royalty to the Council of Loyola in Spain, in the area of the Briquees. Loyola, through his series of desires to regain his leg, it had heal improperly, so he made the rack where he would stretch the leg with several horrible, awful pain and trying to stretch his leg to get it back to normal shape. He endured awful, terrible pain. He had it rebroken again a couple of times, and it still did not heal properly, so he had a perpetual limp. He could no longer be the courtier among women, and as a result, he went into this depression, and he then had his vision of the saints, etc., and he wrote his spiritual exercise. I will stop at the spiritual exercise just for a minute, but I would take it up from there. Loyola then went to form an army. But when this happened, with his spiritual exercises, those spiritual exercises would be the basic training for all of the Jesuits. That's what they will all go through. That's what every Jesuit goes through today. One of the maxims of the spiritual exercises is that if a superior says black is white and white is black, then that's the way it is. That is in the spiritual exercises. That is what is quoted in JFK when Kevin Costner is telling his people, hey people, we've got to start thinking like the CIA. Black is white and white is black. That was a Jesuit giveaway, that the Jesuits produced that movie because they're quoting Ignatius Loyola in that movie from his spiritual exercises. So Loyola had an indomitable will. He had a will of steel, and he set his mind to regain back what the papacy had lost to the Reformation. And so he went to the Pope, and the Pope in 1540 then created the Jesuit order. But this man is a soldier. He's a lawyer, and he put together a legion of soldiers and warriors to get back what Rome had lost, as well as institutes a world government for the Pope from Jerusalem. This was in 1540. He started the order in 1536. He was arrested by the Inquisition and he was released, and he went to the Pope. He threw himself at the feet of the Pope. He would be completely at his service. The Pope chartered him, and the Pope was Pius III. The Pope chartered them, created the Jesuit order. Now he was papal protection, and they began their awful history of deeds and blood. And war after war after war after war, they all attributed to the Jesuit order in some way. Catholic nobles with lots of money donated castles and schools and money to the Jesuit order. Virtually everything they own has been given to them or stolen by them. Of course, they stole all of the fortunes of the Jews in World War II. They stole all of their gold, all of their assets, and everything whenever they went into a country. What's just been released is nothing compared to what has been taken. The Edmund Paris book printed by Ozark Publications called The Vatican Against Europe, it gets into great detail of what they did. It calls it the last 30 days of war, and all attributed to the Jesuits by their massacre of the Serbs and Jews, etc. But Edmund Paris did not understand that the Jesuit general is, and this is one of the most important points I want to make about von Kovenbach. The Jesuit general is in complete control of the international intelligence community. That's the CIA, the FBI, the KGB, the Israeli Mossad, the General BND, the British SIS. The Jesuit general is in complete control of the entire intelligence apparatus. FBI, every bureaucracy, agency in this country, all of it, he is in complete control of it. So whenever he wants to find something out about an individual, he put in the social security number, and everything from all of the intelligence apparatuses kicks in, and he and his providentials can review everything about that man. Credit cards, you name it, everything that's attached to the Rome social security number, which FDR put upon us in 1933 with the help of Spellman. At the time, I believe he was Archbishop, or maybe it was Cardinal Haynes, but Rome was behind FDR and putting him in office. The couple of things that he did was implement social insecurity, the income tax, and recognizing Joseph Stalin's bloody Jesuit USSR government. So with the giving of us the social security number, that is Rome's number. That's why I refuse to use it, and that's why I want everybody using it for everything. Driver's license, tax returns, credit card, everything you do, that number is you, and that number is Rome's number. Let me just back up here for a minute. What comes to mind is Louis French, head of the FBI. Roman Catholic, good altar boy, probably a Knight of Columbus. I can't prove it, but anybody with that kind of power has got to be a Knight of Columbus. And the Knights of Columbus implement Jesuit politics. And Louis French was the one behind the Waco and the Oklahoma City bombing, and his top sniper was a Japanese Roman Catholic named Lon Hurinachi. And the Knights of Columbus implemented these politics. So it's Roman Catholics in control. Knights in control of the FBI who carried out all of his killings. And those two men, Louis French and Lon Hurinachi, are personally accountable to Cardinal O'Connor of New York. And Cardinal O'Connor of New York is the most powerful cardinal in the country. He is the military vicar. And that's why Bush kissed his fanny for going to Bob Jones, because Cardinal O'Connor is the king of the American empire, and he rules his empire from that palace, St. Patrick Cathedral, the Little Vatican. And it is in contact, do you think, with Copenhagen? Of course. O'Connor himself is not a Jesuit, but the Jesuits are like the SS of the Catholic Church. They maintain order. And the ones closest to him who maintain order for the Jesuits are Fordham universities. Now, one of them, the head of the Fordham University, I believe he is an Irishman, is also a member of the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations. And I have the right here in the annual report of the CFR of 1993, whose Jesuit at Fordham maintained semblance and rule over the cardinal, and in New York. And of course, the powerful Jesuit of Fordham include Avery Dulles and John Foster Dulles, one of the rights of the book of the Second Vatican Council. Let's back up now, and let's go back what the Council of Trent. How does Shriners, Freemason, President Truman, signing into law of the Emergency War Powers Act of 1950 factor into the Jesuit agenda? First of all, Harry Truman, who the Japanese called Dirty Harry, when they heard the movie Dirty Harry came out, they thought it was a movie about Harry Truman, according to my Japanese pastor friend Daniel Fuji, who has passed away. Harry Truman was put in office by the Jesuits. The Pendergrass Democratic machine in Missouri, Harry Truman takes over after FDR's murder, because he was murdered in the home of Bernard Brock. When he did that, he then finished up the war with the hoax called into dropping for a nuclear bombs to purposely create this great hoax called the Cold War that would enable the Vatican to knock over country after country after country and replace the leaders with dictators, subordinates to the Pope. That was the purpose of the Cold War. And so when Harry Truman in 1950 signed into law the Emergency War Powers Act, the Cold War was in full force. They were building bomb shelters, etc. So the nation was in kind of a frenzy. When he signed this into law, it put the whole country under military and martial law. And that's when the flags in every courtroom, state and federal, began to be changed. And every state flag and every U.S. flag is now trimmed with gold fringes. And whenever you see a flag trimmed with gold fringe, that means that it is the flag of the commander-in-chief now. If it's the state flag, it means that's the flag of the governor as commander-in-chief. And if it's the flag, federal flag, or the national flag, more correctly, it's the flag of the commander-in-chief in Washington. So all your courts are now more than courts of military rule. They all proceed with summary procedures. The jury has no power to jury nullification, and they are simply enforcing the laws of the empire, which I call the 14th Amendment America, which is a military-style, King of England-style country. The courts are nothing more than courts of the King's Bench, as you can see in Blackstone's commentaries. And the banks, as you walk into every bank, they all have a flag trimmed in gold fringe. The bank is what England would call, in Blackstone's day, the King's Bank. So we have the King's Bank and we have the King's Bench, and it's run according to military rule, according to Birkemeyer's great work military rule and martial law published in 1914. When Harry Truman did this, there was a consummation of a great plan to put us under the Emergency War Powers Act, and actually a war rule. Daylight savings time is what was called wartime. This country only went to daylight savings time during World War II, and they called it at that time wartime. So nothing changed. We've never gone back to not turning back our clocks. We still on wartime. The income tax is a war tax. It was called a victory tax in 1942. So people are paying a war tax. They're under wartime. They're under an Emergency Powers Act, and the courts are war courts. Regarding the assassination of President John Kennedy, we could take this entire interview. You say that the assassination was ordered by the Jesuit general, executed by Pope Paul VI, and carried out by the American Pope Francis Cardinal Spellman, who in turn used the Knights of Malta, Shriner Freemasons, Knights of Columbus, and Mafia Dons, including the FBI and CIA, to carry out the order from Rome. Would you explain why you believe your particular theory on the assassination to be an accurate representation of the facts? Sure. All right. Number one, the powers that be are properly outlined in this book and proven through 2 centuries of showing how it's all been put together. Now, as to why, I will be conservative and stick with Fletcher's poetry reasons. And he outlined in his JFK and his other book called The Secret Team. The reason why Kennedy was assassinated was he wanted to end the Vietnam War, and he wanted to end the rule of the CIA. That begets 2 questions. Did Rome want the Vatican, the Vietnam War, and did Rome control the CIA? The answer is yes on both counts. We know on this face that the Vietnam War was called Spelly's War, Cardinal Spellman's War. He went over to the war front many times, and he called the American soldiers the soldiers of Christ. The man who was the commander of the American forces was a Roman Catholic, CFR member, possibly a Knight of Columbus, I don't know, but he was General William Westmoreland. So Westmoreland was Cardinal Spellman's agent to make sure that the war was prosecuted properly. And another overseer of Westmoreland was Cardinal Spellman's boy, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Lyndon Baines Johnson was a 33rd degree Freemason. He was also part of the assassination with J. Edgar Hoover, another 33rd degree Mason. And Johnson went to Cardinal Spellman's death, and Johnson went to Cardinal Spellman's death at St. Patrick's Cathedral, and the picture can be seen in Coney's work, The American Pope. So Johnson was completely at the beck and call of Cardinal Spellman through Catherine DeLanche, the third in control of the FBI, according to court gentry, in his Hoover, The Man and the Secrets. DeLanche had a phone at his bedside direct to Johnson, and Johnson called him anytime. DeLanche was a Knight of Malta subject to Spellman. Spellman wanted the Vietnam War. Why? Spellman was controlled by the Jesuit of Fordham. Why did the Jesuit general want the Vietnam War? The people of Vietnam, the Buddhists, were unconvertible. They would not convert to Catholicism. They didn't need Rome. There had been a Jesuit presence in the Vietnam for centuries, so it had been decided that about 1 million or so Buddhists would have to be purged. They would later continue this purge in Cambodia with Pol Pot, and the purge is yet forthright. It was a purging of Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, and all of these Buddhists, just like they purged the Buddhists of China with Mao Zedong, because Mao Zedong was completely controlled by the Jesuits, so they wanted the Vietnam War. The other thing is that Rome is in control of the drug trade. The Vatican controls all of the drug trade, all of the heroin, all of the opium, all of the cocaine, everything going around in Colombia. Colombia has a contract with the Pope. A contract is a treaty with the Pope. Hitler had a contract. Mussolini had a concordat. Franco had a concordat, and they want to set up a concordat here, which was the reason for Reagan formally recognizing the sovereign state of Vatican City in 1984. The greatest traitor we ever had was Ronald Reagan. So they had a concordat. Colombia has a concordat. Do you think that drugs running out of Colombia with a country that has a concordat with Rome is not controlled by Rome? If Rome didn't want the drug trade out of Colombia, they end the concordat. The whole drug trade is run by high mafia families out of the country of Colombia, subject to the Jesuit general. And the Jesuit general ran the opium trade. A couple of centuries ago, out of China, they ran the silk trade, the pearl trade. The movie Shogun is about a silent scratching on the surface of the Jesuit black ships and trafficking in all of this silk and pearls and gold and opals and everything they could pull out of the East, including opium. The Vatican War was so consolidated and controlled this huge, massive drug trade that would inundate every American city with drugs being bought in by the CIA with the Air America and then distributed by the trafficking family throughout the United States, Santos trafficking out of Miami. So we have the mafia and the CIA working together in the drug trade. We have the mafia and the CIA working together in the assassination of Kennedy. The first reason why the Jesuit general at that time, Jean-Baptiste Janssens, wanted Kennedy out of the way was because he was going to end the Vietnam War. The second reason is he wanted to end the reign of the CIA because the CIA betrayed him in the person of McGeorge Bundy. Why not giving the cover to the Cuban patriots to retake the Cuba from the Roman Catholic Jesuit trained greaseball bastard? he was a bastard. His father was a Nazi, Fidel Castro. Kennedy was betrayed by the CIA at the Bay of Pigs invasion, which sacrificed all of the patriots on the shores of the Bay of Pigs. There, so Castro had no real opposition. This was the same tactic used by the CIA and the KGB at the top, working together with Anklagan controlling it, and in the Hungarian Revolution, when the CIA fomented the revolution and then betrayed all of those patriots into the hands of the Soviet Army and KGB, which infiltrated certain top CIA officials. It's the same tactic. You raise up a revolution and you sacrifice the men who truly want to resist. When that happened, then McGeorge Bundy stopped the air cover over the Bay of Pigs invasion that ended the resistance to Castro, and it enthroned him into power. And of course, it was meant to be by the Jesuits because they had trained him. So now Kennedy looks bad. He got egg all over his face. What does he want to do? He signs a memorandum. According to the Fletcher Poultry, he takes all of the power away from the CIA and gives it to the Joint Chiefs of Staffs. The CIA was built by the Knights of Malta. One of the founders of the CIA was Wild Bill Donovan, an Irish Roman Catholic who was the most fanatical, and his brother was a Dominican priest, Vincent. So the CIA was founded by the High Roman Catholic, the first head to solidify the Catholic or the Vatican control over it. I'm not against the Catholic people. I'm against Rome's hierarchy. The American Catholic people know nothing of what's going on. And if they did, there will be a march on St. Patrick's tomorrow morning. So as I am against the hierarchy, I'm showing that Kennedy was against the Vietnam War and he was going to do away with the CIA. Well, the Jesuits have brought in all of their top Nazi SS soldiers into the CIA because the Jesuits were using the SS to kill the Jews in Europe. When the Gestapo went into Russia, the Jesuits followed with the SS and purged Western Russia of all its Jews. That's why Stalin deliberately killed 40,000 of his best officers. That's why he kicked out his best generals, purged them, because he wanted to make sure that the Red Army would lose with the advance of the German army, because following that would come the SS and purge Russia of the Jews that Stalin so hated. And by the way, justice is often poetic because Stalin's daughter married a Jew. Now the CIA was composed of the SS. The CIA now was an army and the intelligence arm of the Vatican. The Knights of Malta were throughout. Casey was a Knight of Malta. Anglican was a Knight of Malta. The Knights were through and through. Anglican manned the Vatican desk, and that is the desk within the CIA that was a direct link to the Vatican. So Kennedy wanted to end the intelligence community. That was the end of him. Thus, for anyone attempting to end the CIA and attempting to end the Vietnam War was also because he attacked the Jesuits' Federal Reserve Bank by printing United States notes that got rid of him. They killed our only Roman Catholic president. And it's another piece of poetic justice that a Roman Catholic, not Protestant like Harry Truman, FDR, and others, is a Roman Catholic who truly sought to resist the temporal power of the Pope in this country. And in many ways, even though Kennedy was in fact a socialist and communist, but what have they done to his name? They've slammed it. They dragged it into the dirt. Every time you see it on TV, they parade before you his womanizing, which I don't deny, but my goodness, can't we give him some credit where credit is due? That's why they got rid of John F. Kennedy. And then, of course, as soon as he's assassinated, John McCone, the head of the CIA, the following day goes to the White House and they reserve Kennedy's memorandum of reversing the Vietnam War and make a full-scale carte blanche war. The CIA then is tremendously and heavily funded because it was a CIA war. And there they tried all of their new technology, their anti-gravity machines, their men who were trying to make like the $1 Million Man. They tried out all of their new technology in Vietnam. It was a great experimental theater, and Kennedy knew this. He knew it, and he knew that the American people had no idea what was going on, and he still tried to resist it against his father's warnings because his father was the most powerful Knight of Malta in the empire. Any theories on why they took out Junior? Yes, according to Tom Knuckle in his publication, John F. Kennedy Jr. wanted to find his father's real killer, and he had the power to publish the conclusion. So they took him out right away. They would not allow that to happen. Why haven't you been taken out? Because I am immortal until the Lord is done with me. I am a Calvinist and a Baptist, and we believe in the sovereignty of God. And as long as we are operating in His will, they cannot touch us regardless of their power. Which is why we're having this conversation. Which is why we're having the conversation. Don't think for one moment they're not tapping this phone. You know this. The issue is here. We're talking about a providential, sovereign God who wishes to move using second cause men just as the devil does. The devil always uses second causes men. So it is one group of men versus another group of men, and one path leads to evil. The true Almighty God leads to goodness. The problem is with us, there are a very few men who want to believe God anymore. Nobody believes He can deliver anymore. It's just a handful of us who say, well, we're going to do His will. We're going to trust Him in His power. And like the Hebrews getting ready to thrown into the fiery furnace, Nebuchadnezzar, our God is able to deliver us. We're going to tell the truth. Well, let's go back to understand today. We have to go back to Napoleonic Wars. When Napoleon came to power, he was brought to power in Corsica when the Jesuits were suppressed. One of their main outposts during their suppression was the Isles of Corsica. The Jesuit member had finished the high rites of Freemasonry with Frederick the Great, and then used their French Freemason Napoleon to execute their vengeance. However, the Jesuits were also protected during their suppression in England, a very wealthy landowner, and you can find this in the writ past history of the world. He gave his wonderful, beautiful estate, Stonehurst, to the Jesuit order, and from then on, the Jesuits received protection by King George III. And you will find that in Michel's, the Jesuits, Michel is an English historian. Okay, so the Jesuits are now protected by King George III, where they're going to uphold his throne. The Jesuit used the English army and navy in the resistance of Napoleon, as both sides are controlled so that the Jesuits can control the outcome. The end result is that after Napoleon accomplishes everything that the Jesuits want him to do, the expulsion of the Knights of Malta, the driving of the Roman Catholics from their throne, imprisoning the Pope for 5 years, etc., Napoleon is then ordered to abandon his army in the snows of Russia, killing all of those French and German patriots, so that they are very few patriots left in Europe to resist the tyranny coming in France with Louis VIII, who the Jesuits will pull back on the throne. Louis the 18th was in exile in England in King George's own parlor, waiting for the end of the Napoleonic War. So the Jesuit put Louis the 18th back on the throne. He readmitted the Jesuits, started the Inquisition, just like they did in Ferdinand VII. When they restored him to power in Spain after the Napoleonic War, where do these monarchs get their protection? They get their protection from King George the Third. King George was used by the Jesuits to restore their power in England after the Napoleonic Wars, and they punished the Pope and the monarchs. So it's been really from 1795, right around there, that the Jesuits have controlled England. They've controlled the knights, they've controlled the king, all throughout the 18th century. Oops, sorry about that. 18th century. Now England will never go to war with France again. England will side with the French during the Crimean War. England will be on the side of the French during World War I and II. England and France are together, both controlled by the Jesuits. Even though France is predominantly a Catholic country, and when England was, at least on its face, the Protestant country, why should both be working together, both having the same foreign policy? Why? Because the Jesuits control both countries. When Rothschild sent that note via Rust into London saying that Napoleon had won the Battle of Waterloo, that's when the stocks plummeted, and all the Jesuits bought all of the stocks up there in London and got control of the Bank of England. The Jesuits then made London their commercial center of the world, and Rome their religious center, aiming at one day Jerusalem would be both. So now the Jesuits are in control of England after Napoleonic Wars. We have the Congress of the Vietnam in 1815, and guess who's there? All the representatives of King George. England is represented at the Congress of the Vienna and the settlement after the Napoleonic Wars. If England was truly Protestant, they would have never went there. Now the Jesuits are in control of England throughout the 1800s, and they used the British Empire to further the power of the Pope. England has been under Roman rule, the Pope's control, since at very least 1850, and I say since 1795. Let's talk about Elizabeth II. Elizabeth is a wicked, evil queen. She is the head of the Knights of Malta in England. She curtsies to the Lord Mayor in Old London, and she goes on visits the Jesuits of Stonehurst and kisses their derrieres. She has complete allegiance to the Jesuits of Stonehurst and will do anything they tell her to do, or they'll get rid of her just like they got rid of all the rest of the monarchs of Europe. So you see here so you see her as a pawn. She's just a pawn, sure. She's nothing. Remember, white men ruled the world. Evil, white, sodomite, homosexual men ruled the world. And these are the high Jesuits with their high Knights of Malta and high Freemasons. They rule. And the women who are involved are just pawns in their game, like the Queen of Holland, just to give the appearance that these nations have a sovereign monarch when in fact they're just tools. England has done some awful, terrible things, but all of these things that they have done increase the benefit of the Jesuit order. They never resisted Napoleon III. Napoleon III was a fanatical Roman Catholic Freemason subject to the Jesuit, who was the king of France for 18 years, Second Empire. England never resisted him. They fought with him in the Crimean War, and Napoleon III dedicated all of his ships to the Virgin Mary. England has been on the side of the Jesuits since 1815, no later. So that means the British Secret Service is totally working for Rome all throughout the 1800s. How did the Jesuits regain control of the Vatican in 1814? Remember that they were in control of Napoleon. A Jesuit by name of Abbe Sieyès You can find him again in Rithpa's History of the World. Abi Saiz was a Jesuit-trained individual, and I believe he was a Jesuit. He was a directory, and he was also on the consulate. He was the second consul. Napoleon was the first. He was the second. He was the advisor and director of Napoleon. Abi Saiz began the Jesuits. That he was ordered Napoleon to imprison the Pope for 5 years, and he did so. So the Pope was imprisoned for 5 years until 1814, when he was restored during the Crusades. So they completely intimidated the Pope and showed their power. The Pope then restored them to the papal bull, calling upon the vengeance of the apostle Peter and Paul, blah, 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 for anyone who would ever suppress the Jesuit order ever again. When the Jesuits were reinstalled in all of their power, that's when they were in control of the Pope. And from then on, they have been. Any Pope who resists them get punished or murdered, and all the popes know it. When Pius IX wanted a liberal constitution for the Italian people in 1849, all of the Italians were delighted. Here is a liberal Pope. He's going to give us constitutional rights. We're going to have a constitution. The Jesuits raised up a revolution with Garibaldi and their Freemasons and drove Pius IX from his throne. And he had to stay in Gaeta for about a year. When he returned to Rome under the protection of Napoleon III's French army, actually it was the Republic army that would later be his army of the empire, but they returned with the French army protecting the Pope. He became the most fanatical, absolute pursuant of the wishes of the Jesuits. So Pius IX was punished, but the Pope who don't obey, like what was in God's name, the Pope who was murdered after 33 days when he didn't go along with the Jesuit order, they ended his life. Now we're gonna pause right there for today. I hope that you got something out of this reading here. There are some things that's going on that people just don't realize. With all of the amusement and activities and the parks and all this kind of stuff, they put the world in your heart so you don't see what they're doing in the background. But in the next video, you're going to find out some interesting information. They're going to go back into the civil rights movement. He has some very interesting things to say about Martin Luther King Jr. and about some more things about Kennedy and about the Muslim, about Louis Farrakhan and the other fella. My God, it slips my name right now. The one that was murdered, Malcolm X. I'm sorry about that. But you do not want to miss the next one. This is some eye-opening information you do not want to miss. Until then, to the next video, God bless you.
This book should be a bestseller, but it is hardly likely to achieve such attention considering how well controlled and censored is the publishing business. Thus is the reason for our lengthy penetration of the most astonishing and critical important material in the spectrum. We are in a time of truth being revealed from all directions, and there is probably no more fundamental, mind-rattling, and previous notions shattering examples of that than what is being presented here. The interview is directly followed by a number of pertinent excerpts from Eric's eye-opening book, which will be available soon. Okay, editor's notes. I'm going to look at these editor's notes here. It should be noted up front that the information presented below is the studied opinion of Eric Phelps. However, from the peace of mind of our unique readership, which typically has cultivated a more aware spiritual perspective than the general public, we do not want to give impressions that we agree or wish to promote some collateral aspects of Eric's presentation having to do with his personal religious convictions. The focus of this conviction of those convictions follows is much more biblically conventional, literally path, in stark contrast to the unconventional questions, wide-angle vision of his historical material. Generally, such opinions are simply allowed to stand on their own for you to sort and interpret as you see fit, rather than being singled out to be addressed editorially. However, in this case, the practical side of Eric's stated religious convictions include the condoning of some degree of violence or violent protest and use of armaments, and such convictions as very much the opposite of our philosophical position for many reasons. Note the least of which is the obvious adversarial bait and entrapment which would result from the choosing that we would consider to be low-frequency responses to such scholar room earth current challenges. Generally, yet if the perceptive reader penetrates between the lines thoughtfully, there is glimpse a recurring commendable spiritual message in Eric's commentary of have the courage to speak the truth, and God helps those who help themselves, which we certainly do agree with wholeheartedly and have long supported enthusiastically. We are in a time of great awakening on this planet. The light of truth intensifying with each passing moment and nudging many to step forward and share what they know. Will such ones follow that nudge or continue to hide in fear? The answer to that question is perhaps the most important aspect of schoolroom, which we certainly do agree with wholeheartedly and have long supported enthusiastically. But more importantly, perhaps the most important aspect of schoolroom Earth's relentless testing at its critical time. One last minute footnote before beginning the interview. The Arts and Entertainment A&E cable television channel just started to air when they aired on Easter Sunday a new